Oh, sorry, I just got the recording in progress message. Hang on, let me just make sure it's playing from the current set. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the lexical quality hypothesis, which you might have heard me or Laura or Nell talk about before. But this is this idea that the more we understand about a word's meaning, the more this can help with our comprehension when that word is in a text, because we can sort of construct a more accurate model of the text by knowing a lot about what the word means. Okay, so that is my very simplified, way oversimplified idea about what this theory is. But this theory really influences some of the things that you've heard me say a lot about vocabulary, right? Which is we need to know a lot about words. So this is just one example of some of what we've talked about many times over the times you've heard me talk about vocabulary, where I've said we need kids to know a lot of different things about word meanings, not just a dictionary definition. So maybe an informal explanation, or we've talked about child-friendly explanations, synonyms, antonyms, categorical information, right? Multiple meanings of words. We've talked a lot about that. Concepts that words represent. You notice I skipped one. Formal compared to sort of informal ways of using words, slight differences in meaning, phonological knowledge, orthographic knowledge, discipline-specific knowledge, appropriate use of word within sort of the grammar of language, right? But in one of these important areas is morphological knowledge, or knowledge of what the parts inside the word mean. So here I did an example. The prefix re means again, so redo means to do again. Reappear means to appear again, right? So having that information about what parts of word mean helps us to understand what the entirety of the word may mean, or it at least helps us to have a good guess, like in all of the phobia examples that Nell gave you earlier. So some of the things we want kids to understand about words and how words work, and these are I'm limiting myself to things about words related to morphology. This page could be much, much longer, but since we're talking about morphology, we want to make sure that kids have some sort of meta-linguistic, or how our language works, understanding about words and word parts. So for example, it's really helpful for kids to just understand this idea that words in English do have meaningful word parts. That can help a lot. That's just a little tool that kids can use to figure out what something means. So for example, the idea that uncertain means not sure. Something else, and Nell mentioned this, right, is that sometimes spelling communicates meaning more than sounds. And that's because words are related to one another because of their roots, typically Latin, Greek roots. Most of our language is Latin or Greek root, or German, comes from German. So for example, right, if we say addition or addition, A-D-D-I-T-O-N, E-D-I-T-I-O-N, that might sound really similar, but it's only looking at them, looking at the spelling, that really tells us that these come from, right? They probably come from some different roots because they look different. So something that kids need to know is you've got to look at how it's spelled as well as how it sounds, right? Or similar, in the opposite of that, right? The words terrain and territory are related. And we might be able to guess that because we see that T-E-R-R in both of them that has something to do with earth. So, so these are the kinds of ideas that we can tuck into little mini lessons about words when words like this come up, right? Whether it's during the read aloud, whether it's during kids' independent reading, whether it's during content area learning, we might hit on terrain or territory, for example, or which one didn't I say? I said reading, spelling, of course, spelling instruction. Okay. Another piece of information really helpful for kids to know is that words in English may be related to words in other languages. And we call that cognates. And this is the idea that the words might have similar spelling and meaning in two languages. And for English, it's usually with other languages that also have Greek and Latin roots. You're not going to find cognates with Arabic and English because they don't come from the same root, the same language, right? So I've actually seen really cool things to show to middle school and high school students that are language trees that show the other languages that each language has developed from, and therefore why there might be cognates. That might be a little beyond the scope of K-3 kids, but it's pretty cool. But we can start to encourage young children to start to recognize cognates, right? Through morphology, because the word parts are similar, through orthography or spelling lessons. And as we talk to them about prefix, roots, and suffixes and spelling patterns, we're going to start to see some of the relationships between words across languages that can be super duper helpful to explain to kids, especially our multilingual learners. That website is this really neat website. You guys will get the PowerPoints to get to see it, but I'll show you what it does. It takes books, children's books that use English words. So like common children's books you might read aloud, like this one's The Day the Crayons Quit. And the English words that are in the book, and actually provides the Spanish cognate for teachers. So that's an amazing way to help just point this out to children who may speak Spanish and English. All of these ways that these cognates can be helpful, and some of the places where they are all the time, right? Look, this is one book, and look at all the potential cognates within that book. So that's another thing for kids to know that is especially helpful for our multilingual learners. With caution, right? So sometimes people call these false cognates. So sometimes words may be spelled alike, but they actually come from different roots and therefore have totally different meanings in different languages. So here are just a few examples. There's pie in Spanish, which is foot, right? Which is spelled exactly like pie in English. So you would be led astray if you thought those were cognates. And there are a couple more examples for you right here. So like any strategy, this is something that works much of the time, but it doesn't work all of the time. And so we always want to remind kids of that when they're trying different strategies. But something important to know about language and how language works. Okay, so we're going to get up to teaching word parts. And I have a similar caution here to Nell. This is actually a quote from one of Amanda Goodwin and colleagues' articles in The Reading Teacher. And I believe it's one of the articles that is going to be shared with you today. But this is the quote from them. These strategies, or teaching kids morphology as a strategy, are not meant to be isolated or intensive worksheet-focused interventions, but rather should be embedded in both language arts and content area instruction at various points throughout the year. I have put that quote next to literally what is on my kitchen's table this morning, which is my daughter's homework right here, because she has a test on words. This is my 6th grader. She has a test in middle school on words that have the pre-prefix, and what they're going to have to do is map it to a definition. So this is the worksheet she had to do, where she had to do the word, write out the definition, make a picture, circle the part of speech, put examples of synonyms, and then write a sentence for all like 25 words or something she has to memorize. But ultimately, they're going to be tested on a word and a definition. And so she made herself some flashcards. Mom did not tell her to make flashcards, but I'm just letting you know that we can do it this way, I guess. But the preference is not to do this with the worksheets and the flashcards as the way to help kids gain this understanding. I mean, that is actually my kitchen counter right now. Okay. So teaching word parts, yes, let's see some things we could do. Discussions about words in whole group, small group, or with partners is super wonderful. Discussing the spelling, the sound, and the meaning together, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because all of those give us some info. All of that is important and works together. So it shouldn't be separated. Back to that lexical quality hypothesis. So help kids notice that triplets and triceratops both have the prefix tri, T-R-I, and have meanings related to 3, but the TRI is pronounced differently. in triplets and triceratops, right? So we're talking about how it sounds, how it looks, and what it means all together for kids to help make those connections and deepen their understandings of words and word meanings. Okay, so also when to teach morphology, hopefully not in the morphology block. Sorry, I'm actually doing the emoji with worksheets and flashcards that then your mom has to ask you in the morning before she goes and does a presentation about morphology. Okay, so during spelling instruction, of course, is a wonderful time to teach about morphology. Makes lots of sense to make the connection between how words are spelled and their word parts. During read alouds, and I'm going to show you a wonderful example in a moment of a teacher stopping to talk about morphology during a read aloud. During small group reading, of course, as kids are reading independently, we can encourage them to be strategic. And also during content area learning, of course, there's lots of words. I just did math and science, not because I don't love social studies, but just look at triangle, quadrilateral, hexagon, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, so much to talk about word parts in all the words that come up as we learn new things in our content areas. Okay, I wanted to point out that in our essentials videos, there actually is an entire video associated with Essential 7 Bullet 5, focused on prefixes, and the teacher leads the kids, a small group of kids, through a word sort with uni, bi, and tri. And kids learn about the prefixes, they sort words, they discuss in small groups, and then they come back to discuss various words that have these different prefixes, and they have some really fun conversations, like about uniform, for example, like what's a uniform and what does the one have to do with the uniform, or unicorn. What does the one have to do with the unicorn? That one prefix. So they're having really interesting conversations about words, which I think is a wonderful way to start to introduce these ideas to children. And I'm going to share another example from an interactive read aloud, again, just to show you how this can feel in classrooms. I'm going to stop my share and show it to you. I'm not going to try to get there from the PowerPoint because always too hard to do it that way. So let me I've already set it up so that I can just go right to it. Share sound. Okay, so if you are in our essentials videos, here we are in Essential 2 Bullet 5, and it's actually about all sorts of different instructional strategies that we can use during read alouds. And this one is a morphology example. I'm going to try to get you right to the right spot. And we'll watch just for a few minutes and see what the teacher is up to here.
Of what they're reading. During a read aloud, I have a goal or a strategy that I'm planning to teach. And once I model and I have some participation from the students, the goal is that they will go back to their seats with their choice book and use that same strategy to build on comprehension. In today's lesson, I'm going to reread parts of the story, The Statue of Liberty. I'm going to help the children notice word parts of unfamiliar words. I'm going to stop on a couple of pages and point out some tricky words that may be unfamiliar to the children and break apart their word parts and make some connections between new words and words they already know. The work on the island went on, and soon the pedestal was completed. Piece by piece, the skeleton was raised. Then the copper skin was riveted in place. Liberty was put back together like a giant puzzle. The statue had been built not once, but twice. So the word that we're looking at is pedestal. This is our word for today. When you take a look at pedestal, are there any other words that start the same?
Pedestrian.
Pedestrian.
Fancy.
I know. What's a pedestrian?
Somebody who's walking.
Someone who's walking. Any others?
Pedal. Pedicure.
Pedicure. What do these three words have in common? Like, what do we notice here?
PED.
PED. And PED says
Ped.
yes. So we have PED. Do we know what PED means? Like the root word, what it means? Think about this. A pedicure is done on your
Feet. Oh.
okay? When you pedal, use your
feet.
if you're a pedestrian, you are
Walking.
so you're using your
Feet.
so then we could probably conclude that ped is the root word for
Foot.
foot. So the pedestal is the foot or the base that the Statue of Liberty sits on. Read alouds are important.
Okay, so there is this wonderful interaction. I love that classroom. There's this wonderful interaction, right? That around morphology. It does not feel in any way like some sort of rote learning. The kids are clearly engaged, like you hear them commenting, or you hear like when they get it. It's really fun to watch. And that's what we hope that these understandings feel like for kids, right? They're figuring out how language works and how words fit together. And it feels happy and like everybody's engaged in a great discussion and having fun. That's how for sure we want that to feel. Okay. Let me share a few other ideas about instruction here. Okay, so hopefully we're back on my slides. Okay, so a couple of articles that were shared to you today, and I'm just going to highlight some of the strategies. These are both from our wonderful colleague, Amanda Goodwin, and other colleagues that she's working with. And these are articles from the Reading Teacher, where there's some suggestions for strategies that we can teach kids. And again, I just want to say, in case we haven't said this, a lot of this work tends to have been done with upper elementary school kids, middle school and above. So there's definitely less work on this with young kids. But if you look at the standards, our young students are supposed to understand these things. So why not? Why not start to notice how words work and start to teach kids these strategies, even if we're not expecting them to do them fully independently in the early grades of school. So here's one example of a little mnemonic that we can teach kids to help them. And it actually aligns very well with the video that we just saw. So this is win, words solved. So find smaller units within the bigger words, like that ped in pedestal, right? In another word, use a big word to define smaller units in other words. So what that means is look for other words that have that in it, right? Like pedestrian and pedicure have that same ped in it. Maybe knowing it in other words can help us to figure out this new word, pedestal. Okay. And then notice the context. Does what you come up with, right, that the pedestal is the base or the foot of the statue, make sense in the broader context? Okay, and we didn't get to a lot of, can I use that word in my own life, in part because this was part of social studies learning. Okay, so I'm not saying that they can't connect social studies learning to their own life. That came out wrong, but they were learning something specific about the Statue of Liberty at that particular moment, and so we don't see the rest of the social studies learning, is what I was trying to say. Okay, but for sure we can have kids connect to their own life and think about pedestal in their own life, or pedestrian for sure, or maybe even pedicure. So there's a really good example of how that might look in a classroom during a read aloud. Okay. Here's another way of teaching kids this strategy, PQRST. And this is helping kids to think about the prefix of the word. Do you know anything about the prefix's meaning? They call it the queen root, the root, because the root is so important. Do you know anything about the root? The suffix, do you know anything about the suffix and what meaning that might do? And can you put it all together? Can you total it all together? And there are some examples. So it's another way to teach this to kids. Okay. I like to think about, and you all have heard me say this at different times before, as morphology. And I think most people who work on vocabulary think of morphology as one of many strategies that readers can use when they get to challenging vocabulary. So here it is. So we can teach kids what to do specifically about morphology. So those are those two different sets of strategies on the previous slides. But then we can also put morphology among a list of things to do when you get stuck on the meaning of a word. So the broader list might look something like, well, notice words you don't understand. First of all, just stop and notice that might be causing some confusion because you don't understand the word. Try using context clues. So what else is going on in the text around the word? Think about the meaning of word parts, right? And that might be where we go back to using when or that PQRST. Does the word have multiple meanings? Maybe this is a meaning I didn't know before. Is there a similar word in a different language that might help me? So that's those cognates, right? Try a dictionary or click on the definition if you're reading in a digital format. And then ask a friend or adult, right, the meaning. So you can see how this can fit into the broader set of strategies that we're going to teach kids to use to help themselves when they get stuck on a word. Okay, and I think I left myself 10 minutes for breakout at the end, yay. And similar to Nell's question before, one of the things I thought that would be helpful to talk about is how you can support teachers that you work with to incorporate morphology into their literacy instruction. Again, hopefully leaning towards the wonderful conversations that we saw around pedestal and away from the flashcards and the worksheeting of children, if possible. So do we think we can get into breakouts? Erin, you tell me when to finish up. Good? Okay, I do have one little last slide for everyone. Okay, so just a few reminders. I think it's helpful to introduce morphology to kids as meta-linguistic knowledge. Like you don't have to say to them, we are doing meta-linguistic knowledge, but it's helpful for them. You can say to them, let's learn some things about how our language works that are going to help you. Because it applies really broadly, right? Just the idea that words can be broken down into meaningful parts. It's important. It's important for kids to understand that and for someone to explicitly let them know. Okay. For vocabulary, for sure, teach morphology as a strategy for figuring out the meaning of unknown words during reading. One of the strategies they can use. I think it's not as kids get older and they learn more about language and they learn more about roots and prefixes and suffixes, right? They're going to get to the point where they can use this really independently, but we can definitely scaffold this and start to point it out and start to share it and do it with them. Give them some guided practice, starting really always, right? Especially for the parts of words that you can actually hear orally, right? Like tricycle, tripod. You can tell triangle, right? We can start talking with preschoolers about triangle and tricycle and why they both have tri in them. And they understand, right? They get it. Tri means three. Okay. I think we can teach morphology across the day, but we do still have to plan for it, right? Because when things happen across the day, if we don't make a good plan, they get lost because they seem like they could happen anytime. And so really they happen no time. So we do have to think about actively having some opportunities to teach this to kids, especially in the upper elementary grades when they're starting to encounter multisyllabic words as readers. It's a great time to start discussing the word parts with kids across all these different parts of the day. That's what I have. Nell, want to add anything?
Just appreciate everybody's attention to this topic and enthusiasm, and have a great rest of your day and month.